Just before we get into this video, guys, if you want to follow me on social media, on Twitter and Instagram, the links are here. And if you also want to support me on Patreon as well and help out my channel, that would be absolutely awesome as well. But let's get on with the video. Hey guys, it's Wingy here and welcome back to a brand new Doctor Who video. Now, I was thinking the other day about underrated stories. Now, I've done a couple of videos on this before, talking about, you know, a handful of stories here and there that I think are underrated. And I thought, do you know what? Let's talk about what I think, in my own personal opinion, obviously, is every single Doctor's most underrated story, or a hidden gem in their era, or just a story that is generally not appreciated as much as it probably should be. Because we have quite a few Doctors now, I am going to split this up, so this one is going to be the classic series, and then the next episode of this is going to be the new series. So starting off with the original Doctor, William Hartnell, I think I'm going to go with the War Machines. For me, this is one of those Doctor Who stories that I don't really hear people talk about, and then again, to be fair, I don't really hear too many people talk about William Hartnell's era of Doctor Who that much. But the War Machines for me is just my type of story. I really like stories that are to do with computers going wrong or artificial intelligence, that type of thing. And this story is exactly that. This computer, Wotan, decides it wants to get rid of all humans. You basically know the trope. It's around in many a different franchise, whether it be Doctor Who or Terminator or anything like that. And then he constructs these war machines to eradicate the human beings. The Doctor has to stop them. Now, first and foremost, the design of the war machines themselves are really cool. They're a bit big and clunky, but it's the 60s, I'll let it pass. And I just think that this is a fun story. There's not a lot that I can really say besides that, to be honest. This is just one that I enjoy watching. This is one that I find myself revisiting a lot within the Hartnell era. Thankfully, this is Dodo's last story, because Dodo is quite frankly the most pointless companion ever. And yes, I do include Clara in that. And I think this one has some brilliant moments. Like, there's a moment, for example, where the Doctor talks about how he can feel the presence of something alien, and he hadn't felt that since the Daleks. That's a really great Doctor moment. So for the second Doctor, I'm going to go with the Macra Terror. Now, probably because this was released not too long ago, the animation of course, that's probably why it's as fresh in my mind as it is. And again, you don't really hear about the Macra Terror in the same way that you hear people talk about Power of the Daleks, or the War Games, or Tomb of the Cybermen, or stories like that that often get thrown around when Patrick Troughton's brought up. Now, if you want my full feelings on the Macra Terror and the animation itself, I did actually do a review of that. I'll leave a link to that in the description so you can go and check that out, because it wasn't just me. I had a couple of people on with me as well, and we talk about the actual story itself, what we liked about it, what we didn't, what we thought of the animation, all that sort of stuff. So if you haven't seen it already, link is below. So yeah, that's why I think it's underrated, that video that's in the description. So we'll move on to Pertwee then. Now, for me, this was a tougher one, because there was a couple of stories that I was just like, yeah, that's definitely it. Actually, no, it's that one. I was thinking maybe something like the Claws of Axos, because I really enjoy that, and I recently did a review for it on Patreon. I was thinking maybe the Ambassadors of Death, but no, what I'm actually going to go with is Frontier in Space. I think the reason why this one isn't talked about as much is because obviously it leads into another story, Planet of the Daleks, and the actual ending to this particular story is very rushed, isn't really resolved properly, and just kind of goes, yeah, okay, we're into Planet of the Daleks now. And it's such a shame, because even though it's a six-parter, you would have felt that they would have given it some sort of resolution, some sort of proper ending, and it still feels like there's a few loose threads here and there. The Draconians look great. I love seeing extras in Doctor Who, or actors in the rubber masks, that can actually properly express themselves with their eyes and their mouth, because the Draconian mask is so unrestricted. This story is a really fun political thriller. We see the return of the Ogrons. Unfortunately, the last performance of Roger Delgado as the Master, and kind of a poor way to go out. They obviously didn't know at the time that this would be his last story, but it is still a bit crap that this was his last one, particularly because his last moments aren't anything special at all. It's just him running away, essentially. So it is a shame, but the rest of the story is really, really good and needs to be spoken about more. For Tom, again, this was kind of one where I was thinking like, oh, it could be that one. You know, it could be Robot, it could be Nightmare in Eden, it could be The Invasion of Time, it could even be Logopolis, but no, I'm going to go with the Android Invasion. The reason being is because I genuinely love the Android Invasion, and I'm very, very kind of confused as to why people don't talk about the Android Invasion in the same vein as A City of Death, or Genesis, or Ark in Space, Pyramids, sort of like that. I genuinely think this is that level of Doctor Who. Okay, maybe not City of Death and Genesis level, but Pyramids, yeah. Zygons, yeah. I think the reason why this one is underrated is purely because it feels a lot like the last sort of remnants of the Pertwee era. It's obviously set on, at the time, modern day Earth. It's an invasion, hence the title. And also Unit is in this. Now unfortunately the Brigadier is not. For whatever reason, Nicholas Courtney decided not to come back. Sergeant Benton makes his last appearance in this. Ian Marter as Harry Sullivan. He doesn't appear again after this story. It's heavily inspired by stuff like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but it works. There's some really fun, scary moments in this. Well, not really scary to me, but I can imagine it being scary at the time. Some really good location work as well. And the Doctor goes into a pub. It's like my dream. Also, there's some crappy looking rhinos in this. Maybe that's why people don't like it as much. So for Peter Davison, I'm going to have to go with something like Resurrection of the Daleks. I've said this on Twitter before. I genuinely think that Resurrection of the Daleks is the best out of the 3 80s Dalek stories. I think this is better than Revelation, and I think it's better than Remembrance. All 3 are great. Let's not get that twisted. Like, all 3 Dalek stories in the 1980s, I think, are some of the best Dalek stories that we have ever had. But for me, Resurrection just pips it because I like the ambition behind it, and I like how grim and dark it is. Obviously, Revelation is probably a bit darker. Yeah, people are eating their own dead relatives. That probably is darker. But that doesn't mean that this isn't as dark. Or nearly as dark. A lot of people die in this one. And some ways, brutal fashion as well. And I absolutely love that. That's what Doctor Who should be about. It shouldn't just be like, oh, everything is fine and happy, we saved the day. No, it should be people getting killed. There should be consequences there. And it fully shows how powerful the Daleks are. Tearing through a crew on a spaceship like they're tissue paper. I think the plot of it is a bit convoluted. And I will understand if people get put off by that, and that's possibly why people don't look at this one in the same vein as something like Remembrance, for example. But for me, once you kind of get the general gist of what's going on and the duplicates and returning to Gallifrey and all that sort of stuff, then it's just this brutal Dalek story. I think it's probably the most brutal the Daleks ever were in the classic series, overall. I mean, they have their moments, but I think throughout a story, this is some good Dalek action. And of course Tegan leaves as well, in what I think is probably the most genuine and realistic way that a companion has ever left. Not necessarily the best, but I just love the fact that she's like, yeah, so many people have died, I can't keep doing this. Great music as well. Really good music in this one. Moving on to Colin, I'm gonna have to say Attack of the Cybermen. Now, I think I did actually talk about Attack of the Cybermen in the underrated Doctor Who series, so I'm not gonna go into massive detail, but you guys know that I love the Cybermen. This is the Cybermen's greatest hits. Again, I can understand why that would put people off, because it's not necessarily the most original story, because it borrows stuff from the 10th Planet, Tomb of the Cybermen, The Invasion. In fact, it borrows fair chunk of it, actually. But because I am such a big fan of the Cybermen, that's why I love it. Yes, the Doctor is a bit extreme at the end where he kills the cyber controller, and yes, said cyber controller is morbidly obese, but that doesn't really take away from it, because the Cybermen in this are still similar with the Daleks in Resurrection. They are still brutal, they are still powerful. And I think that's something that Eric Saywood in particular really gets about the well-established Doctor Who villains, that they're popular for a reason. One of my favourite Doctor Who moments ever is in this story, which is where Lytton gets his hands crushed. Now, a lot of people think that that's way too far for Doctor Who. I disagree. I think that is just about right in terms of violence for Doctor Who. I also love how it doesn't particularly have a happy ending. Maybe that says more about me than it does about Doctor Who. Going on to Sylvester McCoy then, and I'm gonna have to say, again, a story that I think I spoke about in my underrated series, which was Battlefield. Season 26, I think, is generally considered to be Sylvester McCoy's best season. People seem to really like Survival. Curse of Fenric obviously is one of the most popular 7th Doctor stories, if not his most popular. Ghostlight people talk about because it's just fucking weird, and I don't think anybody knows what is actually happening in Ghostlight. If you can shed some ideas about what's happening there, please let me know. But Battlefield is that one that kind of just gets forgotten about, which is a shame really, because it is a genuinely good Doctor Who story. The final ever appearance of the Brigadier in Doctor Who. Yes, I know that he would appear in audios, and I know that he appeared in the Sarah Jane Adventures, but in terms of just canon on-screen Doctor Who, purely Doctor Who, because Sarah Jane Adventures, whilst in the same universe, is not the same show, this is his last appearance, and it's a really good one. I like seeing the Brigadier interact with different Doctors and seeing his dynamic with different Doctors. I love his dynamic with the 7th Doctor. Jean Marsh, of course, makes an appearance as the main villain of the piece, who has obviously appeared in Doctor Who quite a few times. She's great. She's clearly having fun with her role as well. It deals with Merlin and the mystery behind the Doctor, who he really is. There's a new Brigadier as well, who I think is genuinely a really good replacement. Obviously, you can't replace Nicholas Courtney, but if you're going to have a new figurehead, I think she was perfect. It's just a shame that we didn't see more of her. All the Knights are really cool as well. There's just so much to absorb from this story, but it all works. The Destroyer at the end genuinely looks great. I think you could easily get away with the makeup and the mask on that thing today. Probably on the same level as something as like the Jadoon. And like I say, it just feels a bit forgotten about considering the series that it's in. Then last but not least, Paul McGann. Now, obviously, unless you count Big Finish, which I do, but I haven't heard enough to properly say, oh yes, it's definitely this one. For me, I will actually say the TV movie, because I don't think that it gets the love that it deserves. Now, is it great? No. Is it very Americanized in places? Is Eric Roberts terrible? Maybe with a better script he would have done better, but he definitely camps it the fuck up. Paul McGann is definitely the saving grace out of this entire thing. Like, Paul McGann is fantastic as the Doctor, and it is such a shame that, in terms of TV at least, we barely saw him. After this, it was literally just one minisode and that's it. But he hits the ground running. He just manages to bring something new to the part, yet still be the same as we've seen with all the other Doctors. He just embodies something. I don't know if it's because he's surrounded by an American cast, but he just seems so quintessentially British, and I love that. I love that this Doctor is, at this point at least, probably the most charming. Outside of Pertwee, probably the most swashbuckling as well. The general idea of the TV movie and the general story I don't think is necessarily a bad one. I just don't think that the execution was 100% right. I think there's just a few tweaks here and there, and this genuinely could have been the start of a great Doctor Who series. If you've heard some of the ideas that they had for the rest of the series, had it gone to it, there were some ideas that I'm not okay with, but I would have been willing to see them because at least it was something fresh and new. And there were some genuinely great ideas that I hope at some point come into the new series. I don't think they will, but I'd love it if they did, especially when it comes to Time Lord lore. Time Lord lore. That's really not easy to say, and I'm pretty sure I've said it in a different video before and I struggled to say it then. I like seeing the Master have a companion as well. That was something quite new at the time. Obviously we had Lucy Saxon later on and whatnot. And so guys, that is what I think is every single classic series Doctor's most underrated story. That was a mouthful as well. In the comments below guys, let me know what you think. Out of the classic Doctors, because like I say, new series Doctors will be the next one, what do you think is each of their most underrated stories? Do you agree with the choices that I made? If not, let me know what they are. There's literally no right or wrong answers here. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like on it, subscribe for more. Social media and Patreon links will be in the description below as usual. And if you would follow me on any of those things, I would absolutely love you forever. But until next time guys, you take care of yourselves. Goodbye. But then again, if you say something like City of Death is underrated for Tom, it really isn't. So I guess there is right and wrong answers.